Okay, thank you, Emilia, and thank you to all of the organizers. It's an honor for me to be a presenter in this seminar series. So my name is Maria. I have a bachelor in nanosciences and a master in physics, obtained at the University of Basel in Switzerland, and a PhD in mathematics obtained in 2020 from the University of British Columbia in Canada under the supervision of Rebecca Tyson and Jimmy Garnier on modeling of mutualistic host-symbiont interactions. Then during COVID, I moved to Newfoundland to do some COVID modeling with Amy Harford. And currently I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, working with Oren Kolodny on many things, but also on the project that I will be presenting today. And my research interest is in developing new theory that recognizes the significance of host-symbiont interactions to ecology, evolution, and public health, and in particular to invasion theory. So my talk is titled Toward a Unified Theory of Microbially Mediated Invasion, and it's a work done in collaboration with my advisor, Oren Kolodny in Jerusalem, Rebecca Tyson in Canada, Jimmy Garnier in France, and Keith Harris also in Jerusalem. And the corresponding manuscript is under review and is uploaded on bioRxiv. And the goal of this project is to explore how host microbe interactions can affect invasion dynamics. And we are doing this from a theoretical point of view. And this project is part of a broader vision of developing new theory that explicitly considers microbes as active players of the ecology and evolution of their hosts. So why this research? So biological invasion, as we all know, is a global problem and a serious ecological and economic threat. And there is surely a need for innovative solutions for the management of invasive species. And a possible way to find these alternative solutions starts by acknowledging that hosts live in symbiosis with a multitude of microbes that can affect their fitness and reproductive success. And so while classic theory treats organisms as individuals, it seems clear that if a host gets some parasites or pathogens, that would make it unhappy and weaken it. And if a host gets mutualist, this might make it happy and help it to be successful, also in invasion. And so we can start asking ourselves, how do these changes in host fitness due to the presence or absence of microbes affect the adaptive capacity of a host to new challenges and its invasion potential? And what happens if hosts can get microbes from other hosts of the same or of different species? And so what do we really know about how microbes can affect invasion? So we do know that microbes can facilitate invasion success. So it has been observed that invasive plants can take advantage from pre-existing microbial communities in the soil, which would enhance invasion, to facilitate invasion. Or invasive species may bring pathogens to native, which would weaken natives and facilitate the establishment of invasive hosts in a preoccupied niche. In other circumstances, microbes can also prevent invasion. So, for example, the transfer of native pathogens, which are co-adapted to natives but harmful to invaders, can prevent invasion. Or the disruption of invasive host-symbiont association may weaken invasive hosts when hosts, for example, are introduced without their symbionts. And these are just a few examples. And there are many examples reviewed in recent work telling us that microbes matters. And there are studies conducted mostly on plant microbe symbiosis that show that microbes are indeed important in invasion. But despite these observations, the default is still to ignore microbes when talking about invasion. So if we start wanting to get serious about fully recognizing that microbes can change the outcome of an invasion, then we do need not only more experiments and not only in plants, but also in animal communities, but also a theory for it. And so a microbial inclusive theory of invasion. And as a theoretician at this point, I start thinking, well, are there common mechanisms that unite all these outcomes? And can we build a model that will allow us to observe these results as part of a continuum? And which parameters should we vary to observe one output or the other? And which other unexplored scenarios may emerge from the model? And so we started having this wish to build a unifying framework that would allow us to discuss invasion dynamics occurring when invasive and native species may exchange their parasitic and mutualistic symbionts. So now about modeling. So most of the modeling of host microbe interactions, and there are not so many, have focused on holobiont evolution or coevolution. So here, basically, we are wondering, so the question is, how does a host and its microbes evolve if microbes are transmitted from a host to its offsprings? And it could be through vertical or horizontal transmission, but in general, we are looking at cases in which the interest of the host and the microbes are aligned. And so an expected result from these models is that host symbiont combinations that are more mutualistic do better than others. This, in the context of invasion, would mean that hosts with more mutualistic microbes invade and are more successful. Now, in our work, we are not looking at holobiont evolution. Rather, we are really looking at invasion from a community perspective. That considers the ecology and population dynamic of host symbiont communities or holo communities, as we write in the manuscript. And we do need this additional complexity because we think that looking at host microbe interaction is not enough to understand what's happening here. And to get a better picture, we also need to consider other processes, such as host and host interactions, microbe and microbe interaction, and horizontal transmission of microbes between hosts, where all these processes are tightly linked, and microbes and hosts are to be considered as equally important players. Okay, so how should a possible model look like? So we do need a model that has native hosts in there, native microbes, invasive hosts, and invasive microbes. So we can have competition between hosts, competition between microbes, and native microbes can now interact with invasive hosts, and invasive microbes can interact with native hosts, and this interaction can be beneficial or harmful. And what I'm presenting here now is our model. It's just one of the many possible models, of course, that could be used to tackle this problem. And we hope that many more models, better and more accurate, will follow eventually. But this is a starting point. And so now let's first start looking at how we model the native host and native microbes interactions. So we are tracking host and microbial biomass. Now, the change in host biomass depends on the host intrinsic growth rate in the absence of the microbes, on the resource that the host receives from the microbes, and on the resource that the host needs to give to the microbe. So, for example, carbon and phosphorus or nitrogen in the mycorrhizal symbiosis. So similarly now, microbial biomass depends on how much the microbes receive from the host, how much they give to the host. And in this case, we assume that microbes are obligate mutualists and can survive in the absence of the host. But that can also be changed. And the resource exchange is quantified by these two parameters, alpha and beta, which describe how much microbes give and take from the host. And so they quantify the benefit and cost of the interaction, where an interaction is beneficial only if the benefit exceeds the cost. And we will talk more about this later in a moment. And the F functions here are functional responses that tells us that resource exchange depends on host and microbial biomass. So if we have a lot of microbes and only a tiny host, then adjusted by factor D, then the host will only give what it has to the microbes. While if we have a lot of hosts and only a few microbes, then the microbes will only take what they can take. So this is basically what these functions are saying. And now if we take this basic model of interactions between a native host and native microbes, we can extend it to consider invasive host and invasive microbes. So here in yellow, we can consider competition between hosts and between microbes, as indicated by these arrows and these extra terms. And then we can also consider the possibility that native microbes can exchange resources with invasive hosts, and that invasive microbes can exchange resources with native hosts. And whether this interaction is harmful or beneficial will depend on these alpha and beta factors here that quantify how much microbes give and take from the host. And so what do we mean specifically with beneficial or harmful? So there are many ways to define this. We decided to consider the effect of microbes on the host. So if microbes are only taking from the host without giving anything back, then they are considered harmful. And if they are giving back enough, then we are looking at mutualistic or beneficial microbes. And here we have some outcomes in between. So a bit more mathematically, specifically, we can have a value alpha and I that tells how much the microbes need to give to the host to be considered mutualistic. So see here, this is the steady state of the invasive host in association only with invasive microbes. And now we add a second microbes, so the native microbe. And we look at how the steady state of the host changes depending on how much resource the microbes that has been added provide to the host. So depending on this alpha and I, so this arrow here. And so what we can see is if the microbes added to the system only take from the host without giving anything back, well, then the host can't grow. Now from here to here, the host can grow, but its growth is limited, so the added microbe is parasitic to the host, and from here to here, the addition now of native microbe increases host growth, so the native microbes are beneficial to invasive hosts. And so whether this association with microbes is beneficial or harmful to a host depends on the quality of the added microbes and on which microbes are already there. Okay, so now this is the model, and this stage we can now decide to map all possible setups. So here we can have the effect of invasive microbes on native hosts, which can be harmful, neutral, or beneficial. And here we have the effect of native microbes on invasive hosts, which again can be harmful, neutral, or beneficial. And then we can fill in this diagram, and we say here in the middle, we have a situation in which there is no microbial flow between native and invasive hosts. And then we can fill in the diagram with all corresponding scenarios. So for example, here we have that native microbes are beneficial to invasive hosts, or here invasive microbes are harmful to native hosts, and so on. And of course, we can perform some analysis on each of these scenarios. And there is really actually a lot to say about this, but I won't go into detail. There is no time for it. But I'm happy to talk more about this if someone is interested. The important observation here is that we can find multiple ways by which host microbe interactions can facilitate invasion of introduced hosts, invasion of introduced microbes, or co-invasion, so invasion of both the introduced host and their microbes. And for example, here we find a case we discussed at the beginning in which the fittest host symbiont combination invades But there are many other possibilities, and some of these have names, such as this disease-mediated invasion, in which invasive species bring pathogens to natives and then outcompete them, but others don't. And so in this manuscript, we highlight what these possibilities are and characterize them theoretically. So now we're just going to look in detail at 3 examples. So the first example is, again, what we already talked about. So the case in which there is no microbial flow and the fittest or more mutualistic host-symbiont combination invades. But what happens now if we consider invasion from a community perspective and we account for the fact that invasive hosts can acquire beneficial native microbes? So the first option here is that association with native microbes provides an advantage to invasive hosts. And so invasive hosts can then displace native hosts. And then invasive hosts might then either coexist with native microbes, or it could be that invasive microbes are strong competitors and exclude then native microbes, which would lead to co-invasion of invasive hosts and microbes. And so here invasion occurs actually through the exploitation of pre-existing mutualistic host-symbiont interactions. And this means that a species is able to invade thanks to the presence of a local competitor, so this native host, from which invasive hosts take the microbes from. And these microbes now have been fed, let's say, by native hosts. So once the native hosts are displaced, the microbes may also suffer from it. And especially if invasive hosts are not as generous as native ones. And so the remaining community can be less functioning than the initial one, which is potentially problematic. So while here on the left, only the fittest host-symbiont combination can invade, here on the right, like invasion of less mutualistic host-symbiont associations can occur through the exploitation of mutualistic associations that are already there. Another possibility here is that the native microbes displace invasive hosts. That native microbe displace invasive microbes. And so the disappearance of invasive microbes may then affect the fitness of the invasive host. So in one case, let's say the disruption of invasive host microbe association can weaken invasive hosts and cause their exclusion by native hosts. So in this case, invasion is prevented thanks to microbe, let's say. And if some invasive microbes were slightly parasitic or invasive to hosts, then their disappearance would benefit invasive hosts and allow them to invade with native microbes. So this is something similar to the enemy release hypothesis, in which hosts are introduced without their parasites, and so they can be more competitive. And so in this case, invasion occurs through the disruption of invasive host microbial association. And so again, we're looking at invasion from a community perspective. Complex dynamics can emerge at the population level that are not accounted for by classic theory. And so we need a new one. We need a new theory, or at least an extended one for this. So now the model includes a large number of parameters that can be varied, multiple combinations that can be explored numerically. And I just wanted to say that the model is on Model Archive, which is a platform developed by Keith Harris, who is one of the co-authors of this paper, and is for the distribution, computation, and interactive display of models. Basically, we can click here. Let's see if it works. And okay. And so we can have our model in a user-friendly way. So we can choose one of these scenarios, and then it could just show us what the dynamic is. We can go here and then just change the parameters. And I think this is very interesting in a way, because it can allow also biologists or other people in the field to use the model, to play with it, and look at the scenario that interests them the most. And so conclusions: so host microbe interaction can affect invasion success and community resilience, and a community perspective is needed to understand these dynamics. We provide a tool to explore outcomes within a single framework to advance the conceptualization and theoretical basis of microbially mediated invasion. And we hope that the ideas presented here will somehow trigger a change in perspective that can lead to the development of innovative strategies for invasive species management and conservation that involve microbes. So last but not least, I would like to thank again my collaborators, Soren, Rebecca, Jimmy, and Keith. So this project would certainly not have happened without their help. And thank to the founders, in particular to the Azrieli Fellow Program for believing in me and funding this research. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Maria. That was a very nice talk. I'm gonna open the floor to questions. So if you have questions, please speak up. Okay, I'll start. I have a question. How do you, you talked a little bit there at the end about needing to consider a community perspective. How do you think that's going to change the dynamics?
Yeah, so I think if you just look at host microbe interactions, you can just have one possible outcome. So like either the interest of the host and the microbes align, and so they just will evolve together, possibly to be more mutualistic. But if you start considering like that also hosts are competing between each other, or microbes are competing between each other, and then that the host and the microbe can affect each other's fitness, and that microbes can change host. So this would lead to different dynamics like what we showed here. So if you just have, if you consider like the host symbiont as a unit in a way, then, well, the better, the strongest or the fittest unit will invade. While if we consider that microbes can be transferred between native and invasive, then we can have multiple outcomes, such as the possibility that invasive use actually native host symbiont interactions that are already there to invade. So they're actually using their local competitor. So this functioning relationship, these microbes that are already there in the soil, to invade and then displace the native species that is in there.
That's cool. Thank you.
Well,
can I ask something?
Yes, please.
So there's a lot in the model, and so I mean one issue, of course, is there's many parameters. So are there any simple take-home messages for those of us who deal in sort of theory of more simple systems? So can you say something that's commonly true from the system? So in terms of whether parasitic or organisms are more, so the presence of parasitism is more beneficial for invasion compared to symbiosis or vice versa. And sort of noting certainly in throughout Europe the invasion of squirrel populations, the grey squirrels and the red squirrels, and the key thing there is, or at least one of the important things, seems to be the presence of the squirrel pox within the grey population, which effectively doesn't affect them, but is very damaging to the residents.
yeah.
So is there are there any similar kind of take home things that you can say?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. So yes, the framework is kind of like the whole story. We are trying to, put everything in there and see how scenarios are connected. But yes, the take home is that if we want to start studying this, we also can focus on each of these little single scenarios. Like, for example, the scenario you mentioned about the squirrel could be this case in which invasive hosts bring actually pathogens to natives. And so one way to start building a theory about it is not having one single model, is to have many. And possibly we could look at each of these single scenario and say, okay, let's make a model for it. Let's think of our study system and where it could fit within this framework and model it with the means we have, or like with whichever the questions are, whichever questions are particular to this system. So this is what I would suggest to do. So if the question is interesting, yeah, take one scenario and let's model that, and so we can be more precise in what we want to really say. Here is an overview. Yeah.
So I guess related to that is in terms of the really significant problems with invasive species, which type of scenario tends to be the case, or are there lots of different things going on?
I think there is really a lot of different things. We tend to have more research on pathogens. I think it's more of a bias in where research is conducted. Like there is more research on pathogen and there is more research on invasion rather than in looking, for example, on how microbes can affect community resilience. There are some of these experiments, but like this little that tells us, okay, what did actually prevent invasion this time? So there is more studies that tell us what made the invasion happen. So I would say that the importance here is really the change of perspective and the realization that that microbes do matter, because there are experiments on it, and we do need more experiments, and we do need more theory to better understand what's going on. And this is with the idea that we do need somehow something innovative also for invasive species management.
Thank you. Anybody else has a burning question?
I have one. So I just for Maria, I guess one question is about. I mean, it struck me that a lot of the main ideas of the model, can be described, in terms of, a host and a symbiotic organism that isn't necessarily a microbe. And I'm just curious if it's possible to think about this model more generally than microbial symbiotic organisms, if that's been part of the way you've been thinking about it. I mean, maybe the microbes are the most significant symbiotic organisms in general, but is there a greater generality of this work beyond microbes?
Yeah, I think it could apply. So at this point, let's say it could apply to mutualism in general. So I think part of this is really how the exchange of resources is modeled. So that's going to be important because, and so that will also determine whether the study system we have in mind really can be studied through this model or not. But in general, like one of the things of why we speak about microbes is this idea of like rapid evolution of microbes, and so here in particular in this framework we don't really let microbes evolve, but that could be, for example, a possible extension. But yes, many features I think are applicable also to mutualism in general.
Okay. Well, it's 3. I want to thank you, Maria and Lenore, for giving really nice talks. And thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks to you, yeah.
We'll see everyone next week for population genetics and Wikipedia with
Yep.
Alex Popovich.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.